My name is Geraldine Hoban. I'm the chair for today's public hearing in relation to the Randwick Local Planning Panel in relation to two matters: Blenheim Street, Randwick, 17 Blenheim Street, Randwick, and 16 Little Street, Maroubra. I would ask that all presenters who will be making submissions today, whether for applicant or objectors, that you reduce your submissions to be no longer than 3 minutes. That would be greatly appreciated. It would also be greatly appreciated if you would not interrupt the presenters when they are making their case, but you put your hand up and then you'll be recognised. And I'm sure Frank, who's there, will allow you to speak when he unmutes the technicalities. We have a submission from a professor who unfortunately had two commitments today at this time, and she's asked that she be one of the first presenters in terms of speaking in relation to one of these matters, and she will be speaking to 17 Blenheim Street, Randwick. There was another member of the team that we were that was set to be sitting on this meeting today, but he has made a declaration of a possible perceived conflict of interest, and to err on the side of safety and on fairness and reasonability, we've decided that it might be inappropriate, therefore, for Peter Romey to be present during this, so that no one feels as if anybody else is getting an undue advantage in relation to the applicant or the objector's situation. So Peter Romey will not be here, and so what will happen at the end when we come to determine this matter later in the day, it will be done in the usual core of respect of how the rest of the committee is constituted, with the other members of the committee as making a collegiate decision. So the professor, as I say, I might have said earlier, has a conflict of two appointments, and she has asked that she speak to the first matter on the list of the public hearing, and that is 17 Blenheim Street. So I'll call on the professor now to make her submissions. Thank you. Frank, is the professor there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Professor Soldatich, and I'm a leading international expert on human vulnerability and gender security. I'm also the neighbour of the adjacent neighbour of the eastern border at Unit 1/19 Blenheim Street, and have been since 2012. I do want to make it clear, overall my objection is not necessarily about the art gallery in and of itself. I do believe in public facilities that are inclusive and respectful of its neighbours and residents, local residents. However, unfortunately, our long-term experience involving this property has not been inclusive, has resulted in unsafe behaviour by contractors and staff, including a recent piece of art that was commissioned that breached the right to privacy, and resulting in internal public showing of my daughter's and my internal home. Throughout this process, particularly since 18 December, we have asked repeatedly for, and we have told in our discussions that we support the gallery, but we have asked repeatedly for a gender security expert to review the format, the design. So the design has been only about heritage. It has not represented any kind of framework in terms of gender security at any kind of gendered standard, locally, nationally, or internationally, to represent any kind of safety or recognition of the vulnerability of a low socioeconomic area in which this house is. And we have been, unfortunately, we are unable to trust council. They confiscated our land for over 12 years. That none of that has ever been repaired, except we did get our land back. And then experience after experience, where there's been multiple breaches around contractor behaviour and even simple things such as signage. And the latest, over the last 2 weeks, like I said, was a commissioned artwork, even after we've raised these issues for 9 months, that breached our right to privacy, including that of a minor. So we can't trust council in delivering an inclusive and safe art space in a low-income, high-mobile neighbourhood. And I have forwarded extensive research about the risks to the council, and this has constantly been ignored, constantly. Even today's meeting is a bad practice around democratic deliberation and thinking about inclusiveness and gender participation. I mean, why is a public meeting for a publicly funded building held at lunchtime? So this is a particular art space in a particular neighbourhood, and any of those socio-economic markers that engage in inclusive practice have not been considered in the design. It's all been about the heritage of the building and about bringing strangers who are artists into the neighbourhood. And some of that artwork has created direct risks for its neighbours, including minors and minor girl children of racial diversity. And we know from the research that minors of racial diversity and ethnic diversity are at higher risk. It's well established globally. So any of these kind of indicators, any of these kind of discussions that we've had with council have not been actively taken up in the management of the building, particularly in the last couple of weeks in the latest gallery. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's thank you for your submissions there. Given that the Professor has another presentation to make somewhere else, is there anybody, Cara Cranson or Michelle Finnegan, do either of you wish to ask a question of the Professor? Okay, it doesn't seem as if they do.
No, thank you, Rhoda.
Okay, so thank you so much, and thank you, Professor, for your submission. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we do have councillors who are waiting on here. Normally, the councillors do present their submissions on behalf of residents of the council. So I will now ask that, let's have a look, those councillors now make their presentations in respect of 17 Blenheim Street. I'll call on the first councillor, Councillor Kathy Nilsson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I've sent a visual slide presentation for you, so I'll be speaking to that. But first of all, I'm very grateful that you're allowing us to speak today. I'm not only a councillor, but I'm also the president of the Friends of Blenheim House, and you will have seen that Friends of Blenheim House have been actively involved in the maintenance and general restoration of this site for, it says in the business paper, for over 25 years, but it's definitely more than over 30 years. And the Friends of Blenheim House commends Council for its intention to convert this historic house into a cultural centre for the benefit of the wider community and to restore it in an appropriate way for future activities. Our major concerns are that all the original 1840s Blenheim House sandstone structures should be kept intact or repaired, and interventions into all original external and internal walls minimised. So if we could go to slide 1, please. Now, this picture shows the original entrance to Blenheim House, and it is facing west, so that's towards tree-lined driveway. It used to be from Botany Street up to the front door. And we must stress the importance of retaining the front entrance room. Think of the significance of this space when the house was first built and lived in, and the significant entertaining that Simeon Pearce and his wife Isabella would have hosted here. G2 is the room where this would have occurred. Therefore, G2 deserves special respect for remaining intact. And the proposed doorway is through the stone wall, which used to be the northern external wall of Blenheim House. And I respectfully remind the panel that G7 is a 1915 addition. Next slide, please. So that's just putting you into the sort of scenario of where we are. So we are proposing that you do not demolish the northern wall. And I think it might be better on the next slide, please. Yes, if you can see in that one, you're getting the major rooms highlighted there. So what we are concerned about is the room. I wish I had my cursor, but I don't. But you can see the proposed doorway that's proposed to be demolished from G2 to the 1915.
Sorry, could you just zoom in? Apologies, it's just hard to see it.
Thanks very much. So yeah,
thank you.
So Chair, you can see the proposed demolish the wall. Yep. And that's what we are most opposed to, because that is the original stone wall of the house. That used to be the northern end of the house. The attached room G7 is a 1915 addition. So therefore we think that the original sandstone must be retained. Next slide, please. And we believe that there are alternative suggestions to all of this, because when you look at this slide, you will see that if in fact the external windows on, a bit hard to see, but if we could zoom in a little bit, please, particularly on the bottom part of this slide. Yes, you can see where on the western side, the proposal is to demolish those two external windows. We would say that should be, one of them should be retained and in fact converted to a door, because the reason, next slide, we believe that the reason we're in this sort of predicament, and maybe enlarge this a bit, is because of this G4 room, which is termed General Administration Performance Preparation Space, so it's a grand title. Assuming the G4, given this role, it in fact creates the unnecessary impediment or barrier in very many ways and potentially impedes the circulation and functionality between G2 and G7. So are there alternatives? Yes. Retaining, as we said, the western side to become an additional doorway leading directly through to G7. And then the next slide, please. Creating a more efficient use of G3, the eastern end, to create a green room space means that you can enter through the existing external doorway on the southern wall, and you can see that the person in that particular slide pointing the finger is pointing towards the external door. So that and that entrance is being proposed to be retained. And then you've also got, you can see on the left of the picture, you can see that there's an entrance doorway there. So our proposal is that a green room space can be easily created by having sensitive bifold doors, which would, when needed, become a space for the so-called green room. Next slide. We agree with the proposal to demolish the internal wall to widen the opening between rooms G2 and G3. And a little bit hard to see on that photo, but there is, when you're standing in the place at Blenheim House, you can see the discrepancy between the two ceilings. G2 ceiling is very low, and that's because thanks to whatever happened there, the oversized bath in the bathroom upstairs meant that the ceiling height had to be lowered to accommodate this rather unfortunate situation. So we're assuming that the G2 ceiling height will be restored to its original height. Perhaps, Chair, when you're speaking to the applicant, you might confirm that that is the fact, because otherwise it is going to look a little bit strange. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks very much. We totally oppose the new window openings on the northern wall, because the north-facing windows to F1 and F2 would be cut into the original Blenheim House northern external sandstone wall, and this should be used and a more suitable solution found. We also notice that the new air conditioning condensers seem to be shown in that enclosure on the plan. And are these also attached to the original stone wall? If yes, this is not really a suitable or acceptable situation. Could we find another solution, please? Next slide. Note on the plans, perhaps you could just blow that up a little. On the proposed canopy entrance on the eastern boundary. That's proposing the canopy east over the private studio entrance. Next slide. And what we're wanting to point out is the fact that that's the original rear, the back of the house. It's now the side of the house, but when the house had this magnificent driveway going from Botany Street up to the house, and it was set in a nice rural setting, this was the rear of the house. That's a circa 1910 photograph of the house. And you can see the canopy. And I've also sent you another really good photograph of, of a sketch of a 1904 issue of the Evening News, which shows the porch. And we would like something to be more, when it's redesigned, to be something more in keeping along that line. The next slide, please. Thanks very much, Chair. This is the stone outbuilding. Now, we would request to defer approval of the proposed works on the stone outbuilding to allow for further investigation. In 1994, number 19 Blenheim Street outbuildings laundry lot site was purchased by Randwick Council, and that top picture is what it looked like when the property was bought by Randwick Council. It was basically laundries when the property was purchased by council. And importantly, a restoration architect who was a member of Friends of Blenheim House wrote a report on the condition of the stone outbuildings as a way of persuading council to buy the property or buy that section of the property. Her comments were that it contains 2 rooms, 3-sided in stone, being the same as Blenheim House, as the markings are from the same stone cutter, identical. So Friends of Blenheim House would like to see more investigation of the stone markings, possibly many only visible from the northern wall, thanks to some of the inappropriate work that council allowed to have done in the past. So it might have to be looked at now from the external part of the property, which is right against the back fence on the northern side. But we'd like to double check the stone markings. Be good to be able to confirm exactly whether it was part of the same stonework that was used in Blenheim House or by the same stone cutter. We also would prefer reconsideration of the ramping design for the accessible studio and toilets so as to avoid lowering the outbuilding floor level. Next slide, please. Now, in this particular slide, up in, if you could just blow it up a little bit, I shouldn't say blow up, should I? I should say zoom in, please. In the northwestern, in the top right-hand corner, perhaps you could put the cursor, if you wouldn't mind, please, wonderful negotiator, navigator, pilot. You'll see the proposed outbuilding, the laundry and bathroom up in the top right-hand corner that's proposed to be demolished. We would suggest that, in fact, this should be retained. and that it be perhaps converted. Oh, sorry, I've jumped to the wrong slide. I'm speaking to the wrong slide. I apologise. Could I go to the next slide, please? Sorry. Okay, I'll get back to where I should have been before I jumped. Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to refer to the front fence. Now, when you look at this photograph, and if you could zoom in a bit more, please, on the left-hand side of the photo, you will see that there's in fact a little picket fence behind the carriage there on the left. And what we would like to see that the front fence, the historic front fence design, be retained and a better solution for the front fence to be found. So next slide, please. So this is an image of the current fence. And again, next slide, please. So that's the current fence as now. And next slide, please. Okay, so we'll pause at that point. Thank you. So, sorry, with the picket fences, they, I think, are representative enough of why it's so important that we try to retain that design. And also there was another picture in there that shows the Blenheim House Randwick, England fence. And of course, Simeon Pearce came from Randwick, England, hence the name he gave to his house in Randwick, hence we've got the suburb Randwick, Australia. But he modelled his house on the biggest house in his area, which was Blenheim House. So hence the importance of the front fence. And now in this particular slide, you'll see that where I've circled, that is the location of the laundry bathroom addition. It was put on in the part of the 1915 edition. And we believe this structure should not be demolished, rather, in fact, retain. Next slide, please. That's what it currently looks like from the outside. And we think that, next slide, please, additional toilets could be installed in this location. And next slide, please. It was actually very hard for me to take photos when I was visiting one time inside the toilet space there. But it's actually quite a substantial space, and would probably, I'm not a toilet designer, but there'd certainly be maybe 3, maybe with a bit of luck 4 toilets that could be installed there. And toilets are always difficult to comply with, as you know. So that's the end of the slideshow. But in conclusion, I must reiterate that the Friends of Blenheim House commends Council for its intention to convert this historic house into a cultural centre for the benefit of the wider community and to restore it in an appropriate way for future activities. None of our objections prevent this admirable goal being achieved. However, we must stress our strong belief that all the original 1840s Blenheim House sandstone structure should be kept intact or repaired, and interventions into all original external and internal walls minimised. Therefore, do not demolish the part of the northern wall, original sandstone external wall to Blenheim House, to create the doorway through from G2 to 1915 edition G7 as proposed. Leave the original sandstone wall intact. There are alternative solutions. Secondly, do not cut new window openings into the original Blenheim House 1840s northern external sandstone wall. This should be refused. The proposed canopy on the east to respect the heritage design suitable for the heritage house. Refer to the pictures that we've sent in. Defer approval of the proposed works on the stone outbuilding to allow for further investigation of the stonework, and retain the existing front fence design and style. And do not demolish the 1915 laundry bathroom addition in the northwestern corner, redesigned to provide additional toilets. And thank you, Chair. There are additional points, but I've emailed you my presentation, and there are some additional comments at the end of the presentation, if you wouldn't mind just having a look at it too. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
Are there any questions of the Randwick Local Planning Panel who would like to ask the councillor any questions?
No, I think the questions would be best directed towards the applicants, consultants, and also council officers to respond to the matters that have been raised.
Okay, that is fine. Thank you, councillor, for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the next councillor speaking to Blenheim House is Councillor Philippa Veitch.
Yes, hello.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Nielsen, and also Professor Stodicic for your expert opinion on this really important project of councils. I'm one of the local West Ward councillors, have been so since 2017. I'm also an artist. I work at the Boomgate Gallery, where I'm speaking from today, and have worked at the MCA and been involved in a number of artist-run initiatives. I also engage more broadly with the local government sector as a director on the board of Local Government New South Wales and on the executive committee of the Australian Local Government Women's Association New South Wales. And so I'm a long-term resident, having lived in Randwick for 18 years.
Thank you, Philippa.
So I'm speaking from those three different perspectives
yes.
In coming here today, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak. Look, as someone involved in the arts and also local government, I can say that across the sector there is quite strong support for cultural institutions across local government. We are a lot more than roads, rates and rubbish. That's a really outdated principle, I think we'd all agree. And from my experience, most LGAs have a good functioning local arts and cultural centre, but for various reasons, Randwick Council is somewhat behind. It's not to do with a lack of expertise with our council staff. I guess there have just been other priorities. So we're at a really critical junction here, which is why I think we have three councillors. We're also joined by Councillor Raffaella Pandolfini, who's also an artist and cultural practitioner. And there is a lot of interest and support within the community to get an arts centre finally in Randwick. The Boomgate Gallery, where I work, is run by Corrections New South Wales, the Department of Justice. It's an inmate art gallery. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary next month. So actually it's a very conservative organisation, but we've actually had a functioning public art centre running here for 30 years. So Randwick Council's got a little bit of catching up to do. I'm broadly in support of the plans. I believe they could be tweaked. I acknowledge Councillor Nielsen's long involvement and expertise in this area, and also acknowledge the comments and submission of Professor Soldicic. I don't necessarily agree with all of her comments, but she did make some thoughtful proposals which have resulted in some quite significant modifications to the front yard area, and I support those. I believe that will help protect the amenity of local residents while still allowing use of that park space. I would strongly urge the panel to consider all the elements, the heritage, the neighbours, and also just making sure that this can be used as a functioning art centre by local artists, with the studios up the top and the exhibiting spaces or performance spaces downstairs. It has to function. We don't have anything else like this in the Randwick LGA. As I said, I'm a practising artist. I've lived here for 18 years. And I have never been able to have an exhibition in my own LGA, as has pretty much any other artist who's lived here, which seems quite extraordinary. So we do need something that is workable and functionable and somewhat flexible as well. I hope the plan of management, I hope, will allow us to engage productively and respectfully with the local neighbours, and I hope we can establish goodwill and relations with all of the neighbours. My one last comment, I suppose, is relating to the vegetation and the trees. That the house at the moment is a little bit like an oasis. You can't really see it, what's there from the outside street at the moment, and you go in and there's all these beautiful trees and plants, And to see the majority of those destroyed for this centre, I think would be a tragedy. It would completely change the character of it. And it will also have a significant impact on the privacy of those neighbours, because you will have the larger block of flats on the western side peering into the flats on the eastern side. They won't have any kind of screening. It'll really change it in a very detrimental way, I think. I don't know if there's any ability to engage with the neighbours, on the western side, and see if the fence can be, they can access the fence, the sort of pathway. Thank you, Angela. I can see the timer. I'll stop in a second. From their side, and maybe the fence can be constructed from that side, and maybe they would be willing to allow that access if it meant that those trees could be retained and therefore their privacy was protected. So I would really urge the panel to see if there's any way to protect as many of the trees as possible, including at the front. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Veitch. Now, anybody on the Randwick Local Planning Panel who would like to ask Ms. Veitch a question? Okay, thank you, Ms. Veitch, for your time. Thank you so much. And of course, that's it. We've had our objector, Professor Karen Soltyczek, and Councillor Veitch and Nelson. Thank you for your time. I think it is appropriate at this time that you now disconnect from the hearing, and we'll go on to the next matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Madam Chair, do we have the applicant present,
Yes,
though,
we
to make a presentation?
Yes, we do.
Yes,
Martin.
speaking.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I didn't have you down here as
They might not be registered, but
I beg your pardon.
I think
yes. And would you like to now present your submissions to the panel, please?
Sorry, are you referring to the applicant, or are you referring
Yes, I'm
to...
referring to the applicant.
Oh, okay. No
as
worries.
far as I know, I haven't been given any speakers speaking on behalf, but I knew somebody was going to come. I just thought they were going to come a little later, that's all.
Oh, okay. I did register to speak.
Yes, no, I saw your submission, which I think had been submitted about 1:45 today, which unfortunately none of us have been able to see because obviously we're in another meeting. So, Mr. Cho, would you like to present your submissions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna share my screen. Let me know if everyone can see that. Look, I'll try and keep my presentation to the allocated time. Look, in short, in March 2022, on behalf of the proponent, we lodged a development application. The DA is for a heritage adaptive reuse of an existing dwelling house and an outbuilding for a community centre and a new public park located within the front setback of the site. As we've probably heard from Councillor Nielsen, the dwelling house and the outbuilding are identified as locally significant heritage items. And the overall design intent of this is to essentially preserve the heritage facade of these two buildings. In essence, we want to provide a more functional and community-focused use for the site, which is more appropriate for the community centre. What we want to demonstrate is that we've really carefully considered the submissions that we've received to the DA. And what we want to show is we've identified opportunities in how we can work with the neighbours and the objectors to try and ameliorate some of their concerns. So the next slide is essentially one of the submissions that we received is the use of the park. There was objections relating to the use of the park. It's compromising the privacy of the adjoining neighbour and potential antisocial behaviour that may lead as a result. In terms of a design response, we've looked to amend some of the plan. We've looked to amend the plans to include the provision of a new front fence and gate. Now, the new fence and gate will be locked between the restricted hours of use for the park, which is between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m, and that's as per the conditions of consent from the delegated report. The gate will also have some controlled access to the users in entering and exiting the park as well. Now, in terms of an operational response, we support the conditions that were provided in the planning report, and that includes the preparation of a plan of management that's to be approved by Council's Manager of Development Assessments, a CCTV assessment to provide locations for surveillance cameras, as well as limiting the hours of operation for the use of the park to minimise the amenity impact to those adjoining neighbours. In addition, we also intend to carry out the recommendations that were provided within the acoustic report that was prepared by Rodney Stevens as well. And that has been also adopted as a condition. On the next slide is essentially a boundary fence study. Now you can see the boundary fence shown in red, and the proposal seeks to increase that height of that fence by between 550 to 660 millimetres, up to a maximum height of 2.64 metres in height. So we had received a few submissions relating to the height of this fence. And look, the reason behind the height of the fence is essentially in order to comply with the fire separation requirements with the BCA, we need to increase that boundary fence. And what that does is it allows us to minimise any heritage interventions to the original conditions of those window openings. So that's the intent. But in terms of the amenity itself, the bulk and scale is really limited just to the communal open space of the residential flat building of number 19 Blenheim. And it doesn't extend beyond the building alignment of the existing dwelling house, as we can see in this image. So we're actually looking to retain the height of the existing fence line of everything adjacent to the building alignment. In terms of overshadowing, I think you'll find that the existing dwelling house, given that it's pushed so further back and it's adjacent to the roof setback of that neighbour, you're not expected to really result in any additional overshadowing impacts because the dwelling house itself will overshadow that rear yard, not the fence line. And we did also receive a submission in regards to allowing some natural ventilation into that adjoining neighbour. There was concerns about mould buildup, and we can easily address those concerns by providing some minor openings within the timber battens of the fence line itself. And lastly, I think as Councillor Nielsen pointed out in terms of the heritage concerns, look, like I said at the start, the design intent is to try and maintain as much of the heritage facade as we can as possible. And when we carried out an assessment, we made due consideration to ensuring that the proposal complies with clause 510 of the Randwick Local Environmental Plan, as well as B2 of the Council's Randwick Development Control Plans. I think you'll see that we've received in principle support from both our heritage consultant as well as Council's heritage advisor. We also accept their conditions and that a conservation management plan needs to be prepared as part of this proposed works, and to ensure that we pick up the items of significance to this heritage building, we should also have due consideration to an interpretation plan as well. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Okay, any questions for Mr. Choi from indeed the panel in relation to this matter?
Yeah, I do have a few questions. I might just start with some of these more planning specific ones, and then I presume your heritage consultant is present to answer any heritage related questions. But if we can start with the fence, the fences, I guess the matter that was raised by Councillor Nielsen to do with the front fence, I mean, this might be a response in terms of heritage, but looking at a picket fence. Now, I note on the plans that front fence is proposed, I think, to be a 1.8 metre high steel fence. I'm assuming that that's addressing the concerns that have come from neighbours in terms of security, in not having people in the park and sleeping in the park, etc. If if that steel fence was changed to be a picket fence, and picket fences are obviously typically not that high, would that be in conflict with the security requirements? Or perhaps, I'm not sure who's best to answer this, whether it's the planner or the heritage architect, but
I might pass that on to David. I think he's probably a little more. But yeah, just to answer your first question, Cara, that's correct. So the intent of the front boundary fence was to provide that security, that safety and security to the park.
Yep. Hi, Clara. It's David Phillips here. We're the consultant architects for the project. In relation to the front fence, yes, the primary thing which affected the design was the very strong reaction we're getting from the community about park security and undesirable social behaviour and use of the park after hours. So the height and the design of the fence is determined primarily by that criteria. So a timber picket fence wouldn't cut the mustard. It wouldn't meet the security requirements which we need to secure the park after hours. There are other considerations as well, in that a picket fence is a solid fence, which would mean that it would cut off views from the street into the park, which is also a potential security concern. If the park is not always if parts of the park aren't visible from the street, even though it will be lit at night. So that is also a security concern, that after hours a picket fence would close off the view of the park because it's a solid fence construction. So from those 2 points of view, in terms of security, a picket fence would be most undesirable as a solution for the front fence. In terms of the notion that we should use a picket fence because the original fence to Blenheim House was a picket fence, the original picket fence which was talked about was actually the picket fence at the front of the house to the side. The position where we're talking about now is not the original front fence position of Blenheim House anyway. It's simply an arbitrary point in space. So there's no heritage connection or relationship between that location and having a picket fence. So I don't think the heritage argument is particularly strong for having a picket fence in this particular position. But as I said, over and above that, the primary issue is security, being able to maintain visibility into the park after hours while when the gates are closed and the fence is shut off. And security, and it really needs to be a minimum of 1.8 metres high in order to achieve that goal.
Okay, thank you for that. The other fencing questions relate to, I think, Matthew, you mentioned that the height of the boundary fence needed to be increased to address the BCA. Now, that document that you've provided that shows the line of that wall indicates that I think maybe the boundary fence that you're talking about or referring to is actually fully contained within the subject site. So I just wanted to understand in the first instance that that's correct. But then there are some notations on that package that you sent through that indicates that the battens on the fence, both to I think number 17 and number 19, are to be located within those properties and not within the subject site. So for me, it just raises the question of, has owner's consent to the lodgement of the DA being provided for any works that are proposed external to the subject site?
Could I just respond to that, just to explain the technicality of that and those battens? Okay, so the situation is that the reason we've provided this masonry wall on the boundary is because we want to protect the heritage reproduction windows in that lower facade. If we didn't have a masonry wall there, we'd have to rip out those heritage reproduction windows, put in self-closing fire windows, sprinklers, all sorts of things. We'd have to turn the front existing heritage reproduction front door into a fire door, etc., etc. So that's the reason we've put the wall there, and the height is determined is that we need to get the top of those existing openings. Okay, so the situation is that we have the distance between the stone wall of Blenheim House and the boundary is very narrow. So we've put in this masonry wall, which is taking up space, but we still have to get disabled and BC access past the wall of the house into the back of the property. We are very, very tight on space. Now, we can locate the masonry wall fully within our boundary, but if we're going to put battens on that concrete fence, which we're offering to do in response to the residents' objections of seeing a large concrete wall, those battens would have to be on their property. So if the residents don't want the battens, I'm sure council would be happy not to provide them, but they are offered in the fencing study as a response to the residents' concerns about the aesthetic appearance of having a concrete wall on their boundary. So that's the background of the battens.
No, I appreciate that.
Yep.
I understand that. So I'm assuming from that if owner's consent hasn't been granted to the DA for the works that are on their land, then that should the panel be of a mind to approve the application, that we couldn't do so with any elements that go beyond the boundary without the landowner's consent being granted.
Yep. And
Okay.
I just might add that basically we are just so tight for dimensions here.
Yeah.
We're literally down to the last 25 millimetres. If we could, we'd love to get the battens inside the boundary, but there's just no room left to get a wheelchair past. And as I said, it's offered as an aesthetic response to the residents' concerns.
Well, that probably is a segue to my next question. Sorry, a lot of these are in response to the questions that have been asked by Councillor Nielsen. The question was asked about the laundry structure in the outbuildings and whether or not they could be retained. Could you perhaps just address whether or not they can be? And also, I'm keen to understand why they're being demolished. Is that to provide an accessible path of travel that meets the BCA or the DDA, or is there an opportunity to retain them?
Okay, well, the reason they're being demolished is, yes, we do need to provide BCA access and DDA access. And part of this whole project is to open up the spaces around the house, which, as you know, are already very constricted. So for the proper functioning of the cultural facility, and also to provide DDA wheelchair access and BCA access, we have to be able to get round that corner of the building. And at the moment, it's totally blocked by that existing laundry outhouse. Now, that existing laundry outhouse has no heritage significance whatsoever. It's also in appallingly poor condition. It regularly floods. It's a wreck. So if we were proposing to continue to maintain toilets in that position, it would still have to be demolished and they would have to be completely rebuilt. So we're proposing to provide toilet facilities within the stone outhouse, demolish that existing toilet facility, and maintain free wheelchair access and BC access round the corner of the house. In terms of the flow and functioning of the whole cultural facility, we have to unblock that corner. But people need to be able to walk all the way around the perimeter of the existing building. And as you know, the elevations of the outside walls of the house are very, very close to the existing boundary. We have very little space to work with. So we want to have as much green open space as possible introduced to the limited spaces around the building, between the building and the boundary. So that's why we're proposing to demolish it.
Okay. Now, with the bathroom facilities out the back in the outhouse, that are proposed, I think there's 2 separate toilets, and then there's an accessible toilet as well. Are they all proposed to be unisex, all gender bathrooms, or are they? Is there any clarification on that at the moment? Does the council have a policy on that?
Well, we can make them whatever unisex council likes, but at the moment it's assumed they're all going to be unisex bathrooms, all of them. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other matters you might, I don't know if you listed them as well, that Councillor Nielsen raised, opportunity of retaining those windows that are proposed to be demolished, the ceiling height of, will that be, I think it's rebuilt, the retention of sandstone, and the windows, all of those matters that were raised. Are you able to address? Did you note them all down?
I did. So okay. So all right, let's start with the easy one first. The existing ceiling into room G2, which will be the main entry facility, main entry space into the cultural centre, and it was also the main entertaining room in Blenheim House originally. When the restorations were originally done, the ceiling over that space was lowered in order to conceal the plumbing of the new bathroom above. So we are proposing to demolish that ceiling and raise it up in response to the suggestion of Friends at Blenheim House. We think that would be a great idea, and the ceiling feels too low at the moment, and it would be good to rise it back up, and we can solve the plumbing problem by raising the floor of the bathroom above. So that's all fine. That's all good. We're going to do that. In regard to the question of making new openings into the existing stone wall of Blenheim House, obviously we've tried very hard to minimise the extent of intervention into the heritage fabric as much as we can. The only reason we're proposing to make an opening in that wall is to improve the functionality and flexibility of the cultural facility, because at the moment the only way to get between the main foyer entry stateroom in front of Blenheim House into the 2015 edition is via a smaller room at the side, which is room G2 or whatever. So when that room is closed off and being used, for example, as a dressing place or a meeting or a separate function, there is no way to get into the 1915 edition at the back and the main sort of entry space of the building. So that's why we're proposing that additional opening. Now, we've looked at all sorts of alternatives with Council's heritage planner in order to try and avoid this or to sort of minimise it. And basically, if we don't make that opening, the only way to get from the main entry space into Blenheim House into the 1915 edition would be to go outside the building, walk along the veranda, and then come in through the doors at the side outside. Okay, so in talking with the heritage planner, what we agreed to do is we agreed to reduce the size of the opening. On the current plans, it's shown as virtually a double door opening. So what we've agreed to do is we've agreed to reduce the size of the opening down to a minimum, and we've also agreed to push it to one side in the corner so it's not central in the wall kind of thing. So we've done everything we possibly can to sort of minimise the intervention. And as I said, the only reason we're proposing it is because we think it's very important for the functionality and flexibility and use, its new use as a cultural facility. And we want to minimise heritage interventions, but we also want the cultural facility to work. It has to function. And that's the reason we're proposing the opening there.
And what about the windows in the 1915 edition, whether they could be retained?
Okay, well, one of the problems of this facility is that there is very little solid wall space in which to hang art because there are windows there. Now, those two, the 1915 edition is not a heritage significant building. It's a tack on to the original 1848 heritage core of Blenheim House, and that's why those windows are there. So we're proposing to block them up so that we can have more hanging space in our gallery and it can function. So I don't think there's any compromise or loss to heritage certificate at all, and it would certainly make a big difference to the practicality and use of this space as a space for hanging art, as a cultural facility. That's why we're proposing to do that.
Okay.
Yes, Cara.
I had no further questions.
No further questions. Okay, Michelle. Michelle Finnegan from West Ward. Do you have any questions?
No, I think Cara's covered up the questions I was going to ask. Thanks, Cara.
Sorry.
Good. Okay. Look, thank you, David, for that. That was informative. Thank you very much. Now, the next step. I don't think that there's any other speakers that we have for the applicant, and no more objectors. If I'm wrong, please put your hand up now, and we'll deal with it. Otherwise, I will assume that the public hearing in relation to 17 Blenheim House has now concluded, and I'll ask for the people who have made their presentations, members of the public, and of course the councillors and professional people who have made presentations, if they wouldn't mind and be so kind as to exit the meeting. Oh yes, Mr. Choi, you want to have something to say?
Oh no, sorry, that was me waving.
Oh, okay. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And we'll be reading your submissions that you made a little while ago.
No dramas.
Thank
Thanks,
you
guys.
so much, Mr.
See
Choi.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
So bye-bye now. Okay, we'll just wait until everyone's gone. And David, that's David's gone. Could Angela or somebody just confirm with me that all the presenters have gone? I think there's just one here. I think it's Councillor Nelson is still here.
Sorry. Chair, I have a question. Usually,
Yes.
Yeah, usually when I attend the planning panel, I'm allowed to listen to the other matters as well. So I'm not wanting to participate, just as a listener in, if that would be okay, please.
Yes, but I think can you hold on to the link? You might step out and then
I'm not sure whether I can. Sorry. So if you don't.
Oh, I see. No, I appreciate that. No. I know, because I'm overloaded with links at the moment. Frank, how do we organise that if we're going to lose Councillor Nelson? I was just going to have a brief chat to the others, but if we can avoid that, that's fine. And I can appreciate Councillor Nelson's logistical problems of, going out and not being able to get the link back. It can happen, and it does happen.
No, that's okay. It is a public. So,
okay, but is it okay, Frank, that we go straight ahead? Yes. On to the next matter,
and I've also got Peter back as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Frank.
And I also got Peter Romy back.
Oh, yes, that's fine.
So
okay, well, we can continue on to the second matter straight away. And I'll just introduce that we'll continue now with the second matter of the public hearing. The public hearing in relation to 16 Little Street, Maroubra, DA 35922. I would like to ask if the objector, Miss Nicola Cameron, would take 3 minutes to make her presentation. And again, as I said in the last hearing, it would be very much appreciated if Miss Cameron could have those 3 minutes to herself without being interrupted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Have you got my presentation there to put up? Continue.
Yep. You may commence now, Nicola. If you want to commence now and you have your 3 minutes, please commence your submission. Can you hear me, Nicola? Can Nicola hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Nicola, would you like to commence your 3 minute submissions?
Yes, I would. I was told that my presentation would be up though. I'm just wondering if that's being managed.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry, I didn't hear that. I received some submissions from you yesterday and the day before. Would you like to?
Can you hear me now?
Would you like to just make your oral submissions now, and we'll worry about any written submissions later?
Sorry, Geraldine.
Okay. Are you able?
There's a presentation. Okay, here it is.
Oh, good. Okay, I've got it here.
That's what it was.
Good. We have it. I have it here.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we go to the second slide, please. The second, can you hear me?
Who are you speaking to? I can certainly hear you, Nicole.
Can you hear
I
me?
can hear you. Yeah.
I can hear you as well.
Thank you. This is it. I'd just like to talk about the works to date so far. In December 21 to January 22, over Christmas, New Year period, the whole house at 6th Street was demolished, even though the approved DA was alterations and additions. On and around the 26th of January, metal sheet piling on the boundary of 14 and 18 Little Street took place, causing significant structural damage to both neighbouring properties on the same day. A pool's been installed, approved under complying development. Next slide, please. Next. Thank you. The original, okay, so the next slide should show the, shows the original house that's been demolished. And metal sheet pile.
I'm having difficulty hearing what you're saying, Nicole.
Right.
In and out. I don't know if that's happening to everybody else.
Yeah, it is. It seems like there's an internet problem. I mean, maybe
because we do know truth within the
I think it's a connection
could
problem.
you perhaps, Madam Chair, could you perhaps ask her to call on the phone, maybe, so that the internet problem that's preventing us from hearing goes away? Would that work?
Or turn off
and
the video
just keep the pictures up there, Cara. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we can't. We can see the presentation, but we can't hear because it's intermittent. I think it seems to be.
I appreciate that. What you're saying is that ask her to continue on the internet with the pictures, but to disconnect herself so that she can make a phone call and redirect it and talk to the pictures. And we might have greater success at number one, hearing her via the phone, and she can then talk more appropriately to the pictures. Is that right, Cara?
Yes,
Can we do that? So. Can we do that, Frank?
Absolutely. So, Nicola,
I'll leave that up to you, Frank. If
apparently your
the phone number.
Do you mind turn off your camera? Because apparently you're having issue with your internet connection. So the panel members and council officers are having difficulty hearing you. So if you could turn off your camera, and that may improve the connections. All right? So you may continue.
Okay.
Yeah, that
if we go pretty good. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, Nicola. Thank you, dear.
Okay. Okay. So if we go to the next slide, please. The next slide.
Yep, I can see it.
And this is the damage to 18 Middle Street. Okay, so we object to this submission. I mean, most of what I'm going to say is written down anyway, so we can probably read along together. We object to this submission because we do not trust the process due to the lack of information submitted, misleading information, untruths within the D application. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through the whole following list. Outlining the mistake if development application form. It's the proposal is being demolition and reconstruction, as I've said, and you've seen the whole house has been demolished. It states the cost of works to be zero. That's obviously not possible. The plans they show alterations and additions. The house has been demolished. The landscape plans, there's stepping stones as landscaped areas. That's now been concreted. The plans have a key with 2 plants and no actual plants on the plan. The trees were removed from site and no replacement trees on the plan. The statement of environmental effects shows that consent was granted for a swimming pool under the DA. That was not true. That was under the complying development. And the waste management in this DA says that materials to be removed are timber and plasterboard, which is not true because there's nothing there. So the landscape, next slide, please. If we can go to the next slide, please. The landscape plans lack detail and information required by council. Some of the information they show is incorrect. For example, where they've got the concrete, where they've got the landscaping is now concrete. Next slide, please. The piling and concrete along the side of the property makes the proposed landscape area impossible. Next slide. As neighbours to this construction, we feel the council's requirements, our community and our property have been disregarded and disrespected during the process and build. In our opinion, it was clear that the old house on the site was never going to stand up to alterations and additions. Apparently, the engineer agreed with this when the property was being demolished. The metal sheet piling damaged 2 properties, which displays disregard and negligence, giving us a lack of trust for the future build. There are no plants shown on the landscape plan, which does not comply with Randwick Council's environment and sustainability policy. The installation of the pool and surround affects the deep soil which is possible, and 30%, which is the standard requirement for this property, which is 469.4 square metres, is not possible. In addition, there's no stormwater drainage plans or any indication of how the storm on the site, as is a requirement for a DA in Randwick. Please. So this is not an ALPS and ADS project. I don't think it ever was. That's obviously not up to me, but I don't feel it was. We believe that a new build development application should now be submitted to council with documentation and plans showing proper setbacks for a new build, building coverage, overshadowing and all the required information. We'd also like to see landscape plans with correct details and requirements for the sake of our neighbourhood and our local environment. And I've just got in the next 3 or 4 slides, I've got the submitted landscape plans. So if you go to the next slide, which literally shows 2 plants. This is in the original, in the second proposed, and then this is an example of landscape plans required by Waverley Council, showing site plans and ratios. The next slide shows levels, existing trees, materials, and the next slide shows all the planting plans and species. So we feel that there's a lack of information and really council's requirements are being disregarded, and so have we on this project. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Anybody from the panel would like to ask Nicola a question? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Nicola. We have the, just remain online, and we'll ask now that Mr. Martin, on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Martin Ben-Nanchik, excuse me if I have mispronounced your name, okay. Will now speak to his submissions at 16 Little Street, Maroubra. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Look, my submission will be very brief. I'll just speak to the fact that the application before the panel is purely for the reconstruction of some existing walls which were originally intended to be kept. And the remainder of the application remains identical to what has already been approved by Randwick Council on the back of a section 4.55 application submitted, assessed and approved. So I think that the predominance of the objections aren't really geared towards what the application is seeking to be considered by, obviously, originally the council and subsequently the panel. There are no changes in the build form or no differences in the build form between the originally approved application and the application that is currently before the panel. So there is no net difference in effect.
Okay.
Between the two applications, that is, between what
Yes.
had already been approved and what we are obviously asking for.
Okay. Do you have anything more to add to that,
No.
Martin? No? Okay.
Nothing
Thank you.
further.
Thank you. Okay, so members of the panel, does anybody have a question to ask Martin?
I just wondered if he could perhaps respond to the matters that were raised in relation to there not being any stormwater plans, the landscape plans, perhaps identifying any change there, or whether it's the same in the deep soil, the tree removal, and the damage caused next door in I guess in terms of how that's been, is that as part of a dilapidation report, I presume, is done?
In relation to the damage, there has been obviously a claim against the insurance, the builder's insurance, that's been taken care of, and that's something that's obviously going to get rectified. The applicant or the client or the owner is quite happy to rectify any damage that's been caused during the construction. In relation to the landscaping, am I speaking to the already approved application, or am I speaking to the application before the panel? In other words, are you seeking clarification on the landscaping comments in relation to what had already been submitted, assessed by council and approved? Or I'm just not quite sure which part of the approval process am I explaining.
Well, it's the matter that is before us today. But so in terms of the deep soil, there was a matter that was put forward by the neighbour showing that there was a requirement under the approved landscape plan for deep soil, and she's put forward that it can't be deep soil because I think there's concrete or something that's there now. So is your landscape plan, is there no change compared to what's approved, and that's exactly what you're delivering? Correct. And the same with the trees. You didn't there's no change to tree preservation or removal?
Both the approved application and the current application are identical in the build form, in the extent of landscaping, in the extent of walls, height, and etc. The only difference is the fact that what was previously depicted as existing walls to remain is now depicted as walls to be new. Other than that, there is no difference between the two applications. Therefore, there is no change in the landscaping provisions between what is approved and what is being sought as part of the current application.
So because that matter that was, sorry, if I just wanted to, I'm not getting in. I'm just looking for an answer to the matter that was raised in terms of the deep soil, I guess, in particular. So are you saying that that's not approved as deep soil, and that's why it's now constructed? Okay.
No, not quite. No, what I'm saying is that our application, as currently presented to the panel, is identical in the extent of the landscaping as the one that had already been approved by council previously, as well as obviously the subsequent complying development certificate application for the pool. Therefore, there is no net difference between what is already formally and legally approved compared to the current application. It's identical, to put it simply. Both approved and proposed, I guess, are identical in the final product.
So my question then to Martin would be, is the approved landscaping plan possible with the modifications that have now been made concerning the concreting?
Yes.
Unequivocally?
Unequivocally, because if we are quite happy to accept a condition of consent of this specific application, that the landscaping is to match the approved, then the builder will obviously ensure that whatever we require to execute in terms of landscaping will be met.
Including the deep soil?
Including the deep soil, correct. The build works obviously on site, as you can see, are predominantly just the demolition of the building. Nothing, there's a ground floor slab, the basement slab that's being constructed. There is no further work that can't be reverted if need be, or that can't be complied with as a way of condition of consent.
Chair, perhaps we could ask the council officer to provide some clarification, additional clarification in this regard, because I guess it's not up to the panel to condition in this, if it was of a mind to approve it, to condition that somebody complies with the consent that they've already got, because that's already a requirement.
Okay, do we have the council officer here who is dealing with this one? Let's have a look. 16, I think that's Louis. Is Louis still with us? Louis, would you like to?
I am panel.
Thank you.
I think there's a difference in interpretation of landscaping versus deep soil. So in relation to deep soil, that can't be located over a slab. So the extension of the slab to the piers means that those side passageways can't be considered to be deep soil. The other factor is that the CDC approved a swimming pool. So the hard surface areas of the swimming pool cannot constitute deep soil. So those two elements mean that the deep soil has been reduced compared with the original approval. So in terms of landscaping is still pretty much the same, because that includes permeable deep soil area as well as hard surface areas. So both are correct. Cara as well as Michelle are correct in saying that deep soil is being reduced, and Martin's correct in saying that landscaping is not being reduced.
Produced or reduced?
Reduced.
Right.
Yep.
Any more questions from the panel? Or Martin? Or answers, Martin?
Mr.
No, there's nothing further.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, who is speaking?
It's Peter Romey here.
Hello, Peter. Yes.
I'm interested in the practicalities of what you're doing here. You originally proposed that those sections of walls be retained, despite the fact that there is a substantial new building going on top of them with as far as I can work out, an extensive area of excavation. I take it you satisfied yourself that it was actually feasible to retain those walls, because obviously it was contingent on you being able to do so.
That's correct. So I'll answer this question in two parts. The first part of the answer is that this approval, I'm not sure if anyone, including the panel or yourself, is aware that this approval is a very, very old approval, dating maybe 10 years ago or whatever, however long it is. And we had inherited the project, obviously, when my client has purchased the property. Our section 4.55 that we originally submitted a year and a half ago, or whatever the time frame was predominantly to improve the internal configuration, because the configuration of the dwelling internally as it was presented was not very efficient, let's say. Our section 4.55 was therefore using the already approved and designed building, which was then subsequently converted to a construction certificate, which obviously had underlying structural drawings associated with the construction certificate. Therefore, it was obviously not only by the extent of the original architect, but also by the work performed by the subsequent structural engineer. It was obviously deemed that those works can be carried out whilst retaining the existing walls. Therefore, our work was predominantly limited to internal major, let's say, internal reconfiguration, however, still just internal reconfiguration. So that's my answer to the question. And secondly, obviously, subsequently to our section 4.55 being approved, we had then had this designed by a structural engineer who was comfortable with the existing walls being able to be retained.
So there was a structural engineer design involved with the Section 455 amendment, is that right?
No, the Section 4.55, the engineer was involved during the construction certificate as part of the approved Section 4.55.
Okay. My second question was about the landscaping, following on from the other panel members. Because of the subsidence, I understand that there's been some extensive works having to be done with sheet piling and so on to stabilise the ground, which obviously means that the intrusion of that new structure into the area for landscaping is somewhat reduced. That's the case, I understand.
Which landscaping are you referring to, the deep soil or the landscaping per se? Have you read the definition of landscaping from the DCP that applies to Randwick Council? Because there are, as previously mentioned by Lewis, two different extents. There's the deep soil and there's overall landscaping, which includes any paved areas within the Randwick DCP as opposed to other council DCPs.
The area available for a deep soil landscaping is clearly reduced over what was originally proposed. Is that right? I think that's what you said earlier anyway.
Who said that? I haven't said anything.
I think you said that.
No.
Sorry, it may have been.
No, I did not. No, I did not.
But is that the case or not?
That the deep soil is being reduced?
Yes.
If it is, we can. So what I did say is that we are quite happy to have a condition of consent, which already is proposed anyway in the conditions that are attached to the planning panel, that we need to maintain the deep soil that we had obviously designed on site.
But from what I understand, you would not be able to comply with that condition.
On the basis of?
On the basis of the additional structure that's had to be introduced to stabilise the site.
And how do you determine that?
Has reduced the area of deep soil.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question here. You're making a statement which I don't agree with.
I'm asking you a question.
Mm-hmm. I don't agree with your statement.
So your position is different to the council officers?
My position is that we will ensure, by way of council condition, that the deep soil that we need to provide will be provided.
So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the panel? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I think that concludes. Thank you, Martin, again, and thank you, Peter, for your question.
Thank you.
And Louis for your assistance too, much appreciated. So we'll conclude the last matter for the public hearing. That will mean that if you wouldn't mind, Martin and Councillor Nilsson and Nicola and her husband, if you wouldn't mind disconnecting from the public meeting so that the planning panel can reconvene and determine the matters before us today, including the public matters. And thank you for your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll just wait for you to do that, and for Fred 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 and for